Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents A Dangerous Game by Laura Beers, narrated by Gabrielle Baker. Chapter 1. England, 1814. Miss Emmeline Lockhart found herself in the most peculiar situation. She had been told that she should feel immense gratitude for the position that she was in, but all she felt was dread at the thought of marrying the Duke of Billingham. She snuck a glance at the aged Duke, who was sitting at the head of the table, and studied him without his knowledge. His thin, worn face was covered in deep wrinkles. He had tufts of white hair around his balding, mottled scalp, and his shoulders were hunched over. The Duke was speaking to her aunt, Lady Taylor, and she saw a large piece of food stuck in his crooked yellow teeth. She shuddered as she reached for her glass, knowing this was destined to be her future. Turning his attention towards her, the Duke asked in a thin, breathy voice, "Are you cold, my dear?" Emmeline shook her head. "No, your Grace, but I thank you kindly for asking." She took a sip of her drink, hoping he would continue his conversation with her aunt, but she was not so fortunate. The Duke considered her for a moment before saying, "It is rather draughty in the dining-room. I can't risk you catching a cold before our nuptials." "I assure you that I am perfectly well." Appearing unconvinced, the Duke snapped his fingers, and a footman promptly appeared at his side. "Will you stoke the fire, and bring a blanket for Miss Lockhart?" "That isn't necessary, your Grace," she attempted. He smiled at her, and she grimaced at the piece of food that was still stuck in his teeth. If anything, it appeared to have gotten larger. How was that possible? "It is my privilege to take care of you," the Duke said. Her aunt spoke up. "That is very generous of you," she gushed, giving her niece a look that implied she should behave. "Isn't it, Emmeline?" Emmeline brought a smile to her lips. "It is, and I thank you for your concern." "We shall have to purchase you some sturdier gowns after we are wed," the Duke remarked. "Billingham House can get rather draughty in the winter months, and I dare say your muslin gowns won't be sufficient." "Do you not retire to the country for the winter months?" Emmeline asked. "I do not," he replied. "I find that travelling does not suit me, at least not any more." Her uncle, Lord Taylor, wiped the sides of his mouth with his napkin, then said, "I dare say that I would have no desire to leave London if I resided in a beautiful town-house such as yours." The Duke bobbed his head in agreement. "My late wife, Diana, spent hours decorating Billingham House before her unexpected death." "Our condolences," Lady Taylor expressed. "It is always hard to lose a loved one, especially a spouse." "Thank you," the Lord replied. "We may have only been married for a few years, but I did eventually grow to care for her. She was an agreeable person." "What a lovely thing to say," Emmeline remarked tersely, but softened her words with a smile. Appearing unaware of the snideness of her comment, the Duke returned her smile. "I have buried 4 wives in my lifetime, which is why I decided I needed to marry someone much younger this time. That way I can assure you will outlive me." "How wonderful!" Emmeline muttered. Her aunt cleared her throat and shot her a warning look. What Emmeline is trying to convey is that she is very blessed to be your betrothed, aren't you? Yes, so incredibly blessed, Emmeline said, her words sounding forced to her own ears. The Duke puffed his chest out in pride at her words, and she wondered if he could hear everything that she was saying. Perhaps he was going deaf in his old age. I knew we would suit admirably the moment I saw you, the Duke remarked. Furthermore, I still require an heir. My previous wives greatly disappointed me in that regard, especially my first wife. She was unable to have children. Lady Taylor smiled at the Duke. You do have lovely daughters, Your Grace. Bah! He replied forcefully. I don't need any more daughters. I require a son, an heir. Emmeline turned her attention towards the blue-papered walls and attempted to hide her growing agitation. The Duke's only purpose for her was to produce a son, and quickly. The Duke's next words drew her attention back. My doctor will need to examine you before the wedding to ensure you can bear children. Pardon? She asked, hoping she'd misheard him. I can't take the chance that you are barren, the Duke said simply, and I have been told it is a simple exam. Lovely, she remarked dryly as a footman placed a blanket onto her lap. I shall have something to look forward to. Per the contract, for every son you produce, you will be handsomely rewarded, the Duke shared. And if I have a girl? The Duke frowned. Then you shall be given nothing for your troubles. I see. Do you anticipate having a problem with bearing sons? The Duke questioned. I don't think it is something that I can control, she admitted. The Duke waved his hand dismissively in front of him. You need not to fret about that, he declared. You are still young, and will be able to bear many children for me. May I ask how old your daughters are? The Duke stared at her blankly. I'm not entirely sure. They are away at boarding school. You don't know the ages of your own children? She asked in disbelief. I don't pay attention to such trivial details, the Duke replied. Emmeline kept her face expressionless as she questioned, Do you at least know how many children you have? The Duke chuckled. What a delight you are, he said. Yes, I have 3 daughters, but you don't need to concern yourself with them until they are old enough for a season. Then you shall have the honour of introducing them into society. Emmeline leaned to the side as a footman placed a dessert plate in front of her. As she reached for her fork, she asked, What hobbies do you enjoy, Your Grace? I enjoy dissecting puzzles. As do I, Emmeline replied. I enjoy putting the map of Europe together. The Duke bobbed his head in approval. I used to be an avid reader, but my eyes are not what they used to be. I shall require you to read to me in the evenings. My niece would be happy to do that, Lady Taylor said enthusiastically. She loves reading and talking. Those are her 2 favourite things to do. Emmeline stifled the groan that came to her lips. What an absurd thing to say, she thought. "I do not enjoy useless chatter, mind you," the Duke revealed. "There is no place for it in my home." Lady Taylor bobbed her head. "Emmeline has practically perfected the art of polite conversation, haven't you, dear?" "I have," Emmeline replied. "I do so love talking about the weather, the state of the gardens, and my many accomplishments." "That pleases me immensely to hear," the Duke said. "My previous wives expected me to converse with them over dinner." "How horrifying!" Emmeline declared, bringing a hand up to her chest to feign outrage. "I see we share a similar mindset," the Duke remarked. "Generally, I prefer to retreat to my own thoughts when I eat." Emmeline started eating the tart that was placed before her, and wondered how she was going to get herself out of this unfortunate situation. She couldn't marry this man, no matter that he was a duke. "Do you ride, Miss Lockhart?" the Duke asked. "I do." "Then we shall have to acquire you a horse." "That isn't necessary," Emmeline revealed, as she placed her fork on the plate. "I already own a horse." "You must be an accomplished rider, then." She nodded. "I am." "That is a fine pastime for a young woman to have," the Duke praised. Her uncle placed his napkin onto his plate and shared. "My niece spends hours riding around our country estate. I dare say she would prefer to ride over anything else." "Is that so?" the Duke asked. "It is," Emmeline confirmed. "I find riding to be incredibly gratifying." The Duke eyed her with approval. "You shall be able to ride on our lands, assuming you take 2 grooms along with you." "That won't be necessary," she attempted. He cut her off, his voice curt. "You will be a duchess, and it is not appropriate for you to travel anywhere without an escort." Emmeline lowered her gaze to her hands in her lap. "Dear heavens, that was poorly done of me," the Duke said. "I apologize for being so sharp with you." She brought her gaze back up to meet his. "Consider it forgotten, Your Grace." The Duke smiled again, drawing her attention back to the food stuck in his teeth. "As long as you are mindful to remember your place, we shall have a happy union." "My place?" she found herself questioning. The Duke's smile dimmed. "I am marrying you without a dowry," he explained. "I must say that is rather generous of me." Lady Taylor interjected. "It is most generous of you, Your Grace." "In exchange, I expect you to be an obedient wife," the Duke continued. "I was assured by Lord and Lady Taylor that wouldn't be an issue." Emmeline frowned as she saw her aunt and uncle glaring at her from across the table. She knew what was expected of her, but she truly didn't want to go along with this marriage. She had no doubt that it would be a disaster for everyone involved. It was better if the Duke discovered now that they didn't suit, rather than wait until after the wedding. As she opened her mouth to speak, her uncle interrupted her. "Emmeline is still tired from our long journey to town. I have no doubt when she is rested she will be back to her charming self." Turning his attention towards her uncle, the Duke remarked, "Long carriage rides can be quite taxing for a lady's delicate constitution." "That they can be," Lord Taylor agreed. The Duke pushed back his chair and slowly rose. "Perhaps we can adjourn to my study for some port, while the ladies enjoy some tea in the drawing-room." "What a splendid idea!" Lady Taylor said, rising. While Emmeline rose, she noticed the Duke lewdly perusing the length of her, his eyes sparking in approval. "You are looking especially lovely this evening, Miss Lockhart," the Duke said, as his eyes remained fixed on the round neckline of her white muslin gown. "Thank you, Your Grace," she muttered, as she resisted the urge to flee from his presence. Her aunt came around the table to stand next to her. In a hushed voice she ordered, "Behave, Emmeline." The Duke stepped closer to her, and he finally brought his gaze up to meet hers. "I hope to hear you play the pianoforte this evening." "I would be honoured," she replied. He extended his wrinkled hand and gave her an expectant look. Emmeline stared at his hand for a moment before she tentatively placed hers in his. His crooked fingers closed around her hand, and he brought it up to his lips. As he pressed his wet, slimy lips against her bare knuckles, she felt the bile rise up in her throat. She didn't know how much longer she could go along with this engagement. Fortunately, he released her hand with a self-satisfied smile. "I must admit that I am looking forward to our wedding night." Unsure of how to reply, Emmeline remained quiet, hoping he would step back and adjourn to his study. "You are speechless," the Duke said, amused. "That is an admirable quality for a young woman to have." Emmeline's lips parted in surprise at the Duke's remarks, but before she could release her sharp tongue on him, he left the room without a parting glance at her. "Well, I have never been so embarrassed," her aunt mumbled under her breath. "Your behaviour was atrocious." "My behaviour?" Emmeline questioned. Lady Taylor gave her a disbelieving look. "Shall we discuss this later?" she said before departing from the room. Emmeline stared at her aunt's retreating figure, wondering if anyone would truly miss her if she climbed out of the window and ran far, far away. The coach door had barely closed when her dark-haired petite aunt turned a heated gaze towards her. "Your behaviour this evening was horrendous, Emmeline." "Was it?" Emmeline questioned. "Yes, it was," Betty replied. "Frankly, it was embarrassing." Emmeline glanced out the window as the coach jerked forward. "You are working yourself into a frenzy for nothing, because I don't think that the Duke heard half of what I said." "That is beside the point," Betty continued. "You mustn't anger the Duke." "Why?" Emmeline asked, bringing her aunt's gaze back to meet hers. "With any luck he will call off the wedding." Betty stared at her with a dumbfounded expression. "Don't you want to be the Duchess of Billingham?" "No," she replied. "I never have." "That is just foolish talk," Betty said. "Your uncle worked hard to negotiate this advantageous marriage between you and the Duke." "Without my permission, I might add," Emmeline remarked. Betty stiffened. "Do I truly need to remind you that you have no dowry?" "I am well aware of that fact." Turning her gaze towards her husband, Betty asked, Will you try to talk some sense into this obstinate girl, George?" Her uncle gave her a pointed look. "You must understand the advantages of marrying the Duke of Billingham," he started. "You will become a duchess, and your station will become elevated." "But the Duke is nearly 80 years old," Emmeline complained. Betty interjected. "Which means he won't live much longer, and you will be a rich widow. Just think of the freedom you will possess." George nodded. "It's true," he responded. "We spoke at great length about your jointure, and I ensured that you will be well taken care of upon his death." Emmeline sighed. "There must be another option for me." "Frankly, there is not," George said. "The Duke is gracious enough to marry you without a dowry. Need I remind you that your dowry went to help pay your father's debts after his untimely death?" "No, you don't," Emmeline muttered. "The Duke's solicitor approached us after he saw you at the opera," George reminded her. "If it wasn't for that, we would not be in this equally beneficial situation." "It doesn't seem beneficial," she said. "I feel like a lamb being led to the slaughter." Betty frowned. "No marriage is perfect, but if you can just bide your time until the Duke dies, you will be free to live however you see fit." "What if he lives to be 100?" she asked. "That would be most unfortunate," Betty remarked, "but it is quite unlikely." George adjusted his white cravat. "The Duke is already halfway in the grave. He just requires an heir." "What if I am unable to produce a son?" Betty gasped. "You must," she declared. "Your entire future depends upon it." "I don't think that is something one can plan on," Emmeline pointed out. "The Duke has sired boys before with his mistresses, so we know that he is capable of producing an heir," George said. Emmeline pressed her lips together. "How grand!" "You are looking at this the wrong way," Betty pressed. "Marrying the Duke will open doors to you that were previously closed. You will be welcomed at every ball, soiree, and social gathering the ton offers." "I care little about that," Emmeline admitted. Betty let out an annoyed sigh. "What is it that you want, Emmeline?" "I want to fall in love and marry a man of my choosing." "What the Duke is offering you is better than love," Betty asserted. "He is offering you a chance at living comfortably for the rest of your days. I must say that security is more important than love." George spoke up. "As for marrying a man of your choosing," he began, "what man would marry you without a dowry?" Emmeline remained quiet, knowing her aunt and uncle had made valid points. "If you don't marry the Duke, then you will be forced to take a position as a companion or governess," Betty said, her tone hardening. "And your parents would not have wanted that life for you." "I don't want to become a governess," Emmeline admitted. "I should say not," Betty declared. "You are the daughter of a viscount, and you deserve much better." "But I don't think I can marry the Duke." George and Betty exchanged a look before her uncle spoke. "The Duke intends to marry you on your 21st birthday. I suppose you shall have until then to decide your fate." "The banns have been posted," Betty reminded her. "Furthermore, the whole ton knows of your pending nuptials. If you decide not to go through with the wedding, then your reputation will be in tatters." "We can't force you to marry the Duke, but we truly hope you do," George pressed. "He can give you a life that we can only dream of." Betty bobbed her head in agreement. "Just imagine. You would be dressed in the finest gowns, draped in jewels, and live in elaborate estates." "But the Duke doesn't retire to the countryside," Emmeline pointed out. "That doesn't mean you can't," Betty said. "After you produce an heir, you will have the freedom to do as you please." George offered her a sad smile. "Your parents would have wanted this for you," he stated. "I have no doubt of that." "But my parents were a love match," she pressed. "Wouldn't they rather have me marry for love?" "Love is such a fickle thing," Betty scoffed. "It is true," George agreed. "I have known many people that started off as love matches, but they grew cold and despondent towards one another later in life. Love is a gamble, and it usually doesn't pay off," Betty expressed. "Besides, you are still young. You may even find love after you marry the Duke." Thinking she'd misheard her aunt, Emmeline asked in a hushed voice, "Are you insinuating that I should take a lover after I am married to the Duke?" Betty shrugged. "It wouldn't be unheard of, assuming you have already produced an heir." Emmeline stared at her aunt, unsure of what she should say to that ridiculous comment. "Don't be so prudish, my dear," Betty said. "It is very unbecoming of you." The coach came to a stop outside of their three-level whitewashed townhouse. It dipped to the side as the footman stepped off his perch and came around to place the step down. Once it was extended, he opened the door and offered his hand in assistance. After they exited the coach, the footman rushed forward to open the iron gate. They approached the door, which was opened by their stodgy butler. He had a long, narrow face and curly blonde hair. "Welcome home," Drew greeted in a stiff tone, opening the door wide. "May I ask how the dinner party went?" "It went well," Betty replied as she removed her long white gloves. "That is wonderful," Drew said as he closed the door behind them. Betty extended her gloves towards the butler. "I require a long soak this evening," she stated. "Will you ensure the water is heated up to my liking?" Drew tipped his head. "Yes, milady," he responded as he went to do her bidding. "If anyone needs me, I will be in my bedchamber." Betty walked over to the stairs that ran along the length of the far wall and started up them. Finding herself alone with her uncle, she asked, "Why are you so intent on me marrying the Duke?" George gave her a compassionate look as he gently placed his hand on her right shoulder. "No one is guaranteed a good life, but we can increase our odds of one by making good choices," he said. "Betty and I just want what's best for you, especially since we won't always be around." Emmeline's eyes ran over her uncle's dark hair and saw white strands poking out in his sideburns and along his temples. He continued, "Just think about what we said," he encouraged. "We trust that you will make the right decision." "And if I don't?" George lowered his hand to his side and sighed. "Then I would be sued for breach of contract." "Do you think the Duke would be that petty?" "I am not entirely sure, but I hope it won't come to that," her uncle replied. "Now, off with you. I need to get some work done before my meetings tomorrow. As Emmeline walked across...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?